Orb on the movements of the Earth, Episode 8. We must become Icarus? We must fly too close to the sun.
あなたが解いたんですか?
いえいえ、私は回答者じゃありません。
After all this talk about wanting recognition.
私はただの図書館の雑用係というか、職場の主人様に頼まれ
Okay,
ただけで。
alright, that's enough. Oxy's so cute. He gets so uncomfortable so easily.
会えないというか、当分留守にしてて。
当分ってどのくらい?
He's dead. He died just now after solving the problem.
当分です。
Very specific. Thank you for the information.
そちらへ伺わせていただけないでしょうか?
This is incredibly awkward. They really are a crew. This is going to be like a reverse Mrs. Doubtfire situation. Sometimes the perfect man for the job is a woman pretending to be a man.
そういえば自己紹介まだでした。自分奥地って言います。
Something happens. Oxy, uncomfortable.
すごいな。初めて会いました。失礼ですが、普遍論争ではどちらの立場を?
That's a very astute question for a peasant.
ユイメイ論です。アベラールを支持します。
私の主人様もユ
Hide
イ
it.
メロンで
Hide your
オカム
excitement.
を支持してます。
Is that the same Occam as Occam Razor fame?
真理の探求にはある種の大胆さは。
She couldn't wait to get somewhere private.
あの掲示板の問題もそういう姿勢で?
はい。いや、主人様がそうおっしゃってました。
Oh, you just exposed yourself. Whoops, that was a great question.
ついてるぞ。
Speaking of
こんな
blasting
人
through.
物に巡り合った。
確かにこんな賢そうなメイドさんを雇ってるなんて。
Did he not figure it out? Yeah, okay, okay, yeah.
彼女が回答者だ。
I mean, that's what that question implied, and she answered it.
それに何よりいいのは、あの話をしても密告される可能性は低
Right.
い。
You both have skin in the game.
密告したら自分自身も魔女扱いされる可能性が非常に高い。だから女性は好都合だ。
そんな酷な。
それが現実だ。
I mean, he's not expressly condoning it. He's not the one burning witches. It remains to be seen how much he's willing to use her or exploit her. I say he because Oxy would never.
ご主人様には感服します。あんな短時
How long
間
do you
で
think
ご
he's
回答
going?
なさるとは、天文に精通していらっしゃる。
本当に
She's so bad at hiding it too. She's as bad as hiding her involvement as Rafal was at burning paper.
ヨレンタさんも天文に興味が?
ええ、まあ。
So much, so much.
中でも古代の宇宙論の数々。なんというかあれは、ぶっ飛んでる。
She's gonna expose herself directly at some point because she just can't stand it.
突拍子のないことを考えて
She wants to talk about it so badly. She just loves it so much.
異教徒
And
の
I
ヘ
can
ラクレイ
relate.
デスはご存知で?
はい。
She just can't say no. Yeah.
すごいな。博識でいらっしゃる。
Yeah, about that.
人類はその火が見えない片側だけに進んでいて、さらにその火の周りを地球も太陽も動いて
That's
い
interesting.
るとか。
Never heard that one before.
私は教会のものですよ。安心してください。
ですよね。なら一安心です。
How do you think I lost this eye?
あまりに無謀ですよね。
ええ、地球が宇宙の中心に貼り付けになってるのは神様が意図的にしたことですしね。
This is uncomfortably relatable though, because sometimes you find yourself in conversations where people are like, obviously you also think X, and you're like, oh, oh, I see. Well, I certainly am familiar with the idea. Why don't you tell me what you think about that? Or also the situations where you meet a new person and you're wondering how freely you can speak, but it's so risky to take one step into that middle territory where you're actually exploring interesting ideas because, you know, there's this panopticon, we're all watching each other. And then finally someone goes for it. Someone just shoots for it, says one tiny thing, you know, drops a little clue, and you're both like, oh, and then there's this moment of palpable tension. Every now and then I'll meet someone who's made that mental link of like, good people are on this side and bad people are on that side. And the conversation so far is going really well, and there's an affinity developing between us. So because I have a positive image of that moment, through the transitive property, the assumption gets made that I'm on that side. Fortunately though, in my experience, if the person's at a level of development where they're able to form good rapport in the first place, as long as defensiveness and judgment and fear of reprisal and all that stuff doesn't enter the conversation, measured disagreement is usually fine. Some people do get very emotional and take it very personally, just by the sheer fact that someone holds a different idea. But I think speaking of some of the themes of the last episode, that often gets over-attributed, and really what people are picking up on and fighting about is the personal challenge or attack, not wanting to feel or look stupid. Also, I mean, the very reason why I don't want to subscribe part and parcel with a whole group and all of its ideologies is partly because I think the magic happens on the nuance level. And because that's the case, you can almost always find common ground somewhere, as long as you're not like stuck defending something. But it does take a little bit of energy. There is always that initial tension.
現在を背負った我々の宿命というか、この世が不幸な根拠というか。
Original sin is an idea that gets more interesting to me over time.
彼のは少し違った。
poignant
フィ
sweat
ロハウ
drop.
スのような主観的な思想ではなく
Miss me with that
観測
subjective
的事
reasoning.
実をもとに仮説を立てた。
この話は一体。
おや、地球儀とは珍しい。
Nice pivot to the same topic. Wow, isn't it crazy how it spins?
もし仮に彼らの言ってる馬鹿げた仮説が広まってしまったら、
そりゃ大混乱でしょう。教会の教えに反してる。
Sometimes you gotta think in crazy ways. Isn't that what you said?
今のままでいたいですか？
It's a
も
big
し仮
question.
に我々は生まれながらに罪だけじゃなく自由も持ってるとしたらどうします？
That's a really cool phrasing of that question. The way I learned original sin in Catholic school, or at least the way I interpreted it, was something like this. There is some spiritual quality that permeates the essence of humans that is corrupt and dirty. Another way to look at it, though, which I guess actually is not mutually exclusive with that idea, just maybe rounding it out a little bit, is that it's not so much just a random punishment and judgment of humanity for reasons, but instead something like inevitable trade-offs of some of the elements of humanity that are perhaps the most beautiful. Because Eve eats the apple, right? And she and Adam gain conception of their nakedness, and that is kind of the beginning of humanity. In some way of looking at it, that's just knowledge and reasoning and more advanced conceptions, like the ability to abstract, discover patterns, reason from beyond a place of just animalistic instinct, because this idea of like being separate from the animals, right? And that is neither inherently good or bad. It will depend on what it's used for. The sin element of it, you could argue, a greater conception of the world and others, and those powers of abstraction, and also probably a greater ability to choose. You now have the innate ability for a much more enhanced version of evil. And that capacity, at least, is just going to be a default state of man, given that level of ability. I mean, it's not too far removed from the classic Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. It's like with great knowledge comes the great power to do great evil. And that way, I think original sin makes a lot of sense, at least to me. But there's another side to that also, which is original virtue. Because if we were purely animalistic, mechanical creatures, in the way we think about animals, at least, there would be no values either, right? It would be much more on that side of like the deterministic view of human action, in which the argument for any sort of good and evil is a lot weaker, at least. Where this might get corrupted is where it gets a little bit misanthropic, you know, like humanity's just so terrible through and through, and what despicable creatures we are with no redeeming features because of our birth. That's sort of a depressing way to look at it. Though maybe it's similar on the other side as well, right? I think one of the prevailing ideas I grew up with was that you're born very special and you're born perfect. And there's some dissonance there, right? Because like neither of those is absolutely true. There's one added thing though that I think can ground this out a little bit, which is that it starts to make a lot more sense when you think of it in terms of potential. Everyone is born with tremendous, overwhelming potential for both good and evil. And the struggle and adventure of one's life is deciding how to solidify that potential into action. Nobody really needs to be convinced that humans have the potential to do terrible things. Though interestingly, now that I think about it, some people do need to be convinced, or it does take a lot of convincing, that humans are capable of great good. Maybe these days it's because without some grander concepts of God and with an increasing slip into sort of moral and value relativism, there's nothing as clear to pin a high-reaching thing or goodness to, because I think we've sort of correctly identified that the highest thing is not pleasure, and that pleasure contains just as many pitfalls as it does gifts. But we know much more universally that pain is undesirable.
もし仮に
So sin and freedom is very interesting
信じているもの
in that
見
phrasing.
ている現実その多くが嘘だったらどうします？
は？そんなのありえない。常識的に考えて。
Right, yeah. If you're using the ideas to judge the ideas, you're in a weird recursive loop.
そこじゃ神は宇宙に階級など作っていない。
Now you're speaking my language.
根拠などない。
やめてください。これは不適切です。
ええ、その通り。
Right, under the prevailing standards of the day.
目指すのはただ一つ。真理だ。
お引き取りください。
I thought you were ready. She'll come around.
回答者さんにお伝えを。
Please tell your master about this.
昼時にあの掲示板前で待ってると。
Oh, she'll be there. It takes a little bit of time. I try so hard to always push in the direction of maximizing personal agency and free will, because I think that's not only the best thing we can do, it's maybe the only thing we actually can do. And even if that's just a tiny spark of our existences, I want to fan the flames as much as possible, right? And so even if it's not always totally correct, I always want to like default to that side. And I do have a choice in this, that I can develop this beyond my expectations. These limits are only temporary. There is no curse, that categories are not a death sentence. But there's a point at which I sort of hit bottom on this, where I can't really argue any further, where it's hard to exactly pin down, but there's a point in your life before you know there's a choice where you don't really know how to question. You don't know that questioning is a thing or can be useful. That fanning of the flames, you know, the increasing your feelings of agency and wanting to take responsibility in life for yourself and seeing it as your journey, your mission. It's like a rock rolling downhill that gains speed and gains power, but like something has to push it off its resting point on the hill. And so that may just be luck. You know, that may just be influences. I mean, I would argue on a practical level, everyone has that. Beyond a certain age, there's no real reason to be at a total state of rest in that way. There's been some push somewhere. Somebody has recommended the idea of agency to you or responsibility to you once, you know. I guess it's just a matter of like, is it a hard enough push to get that ball rolling? Anyway, in this way, I would say I'm very grateful for some of my experiences because I remember as a kid having what is probably a very standard, indoctrination is too negative a word, but you know, just accepting the water I was swimming in as the totality of what could be. But certain people in my family being very free thinkers and very critical to the point where I remember being so horrified as a kid to hear what some of my family members were arguing for. Not even that they believed it, in some cases just playing devil's advocate, only to have this exact experience, or what I expect this to be, of initial horror of like, how could somebody I care about think this thing that I know is wrong because everyone thinks this way, everyone believes this, only to have that creep in over time and even later like have some of these things become like standard beliefs or not as controversial. A specific example, I remember having a very, very heated debate with my father that left me in tears about the concept of drug legalization, about how in many cases it's a bigger travesty having people in jail for possession of substances than it is for people to use certain substances recreationally. He put forth as a point the link between criminality of a thing and violent crime associated with the thing. And I'm not sure he even fully supported it, but that experience of remembering that reaction, how crazy it was, and how now it's like perfectly fine and valid to talk about as a theory, is I think a really great model, not just for how society's standards are not necessarily the best benchmark, but also the process of imbuing patience into discussion, because there was no way I was going to hear that in a way that wasn't upsetting when I was that age. But I only had that conversation with him once, and now I'm like deeply grateful for the fact that he was able to talk about that at all. There's just a life cycle to thought and ideas. People will be where they are now, and some people will be in the same place on some issues 40, 50 years later, but in many ways they'll also come to wildly different places than when they first started. And I think just thinking about it that way, it takes a lot of the fear out of it and the character judgment out of it. I suspect this will happen pretty quickly, you know, like she'll be there tomorrow, but her reaction is perfectly sympathetic and understandable, even as someone who says she wants to pursue truth.
大丈夫だ。あの顔を見ればわかる。
女性だから
No.
いや、
Oxy.
それが真理。
I mean, you don't have to blanket accept this either.
そんなこと本気
You
で
can
研
just
究す
consider
る
it as
な
a
んて
possibility and look into it.
実践するのは罪の重みが違う。あ、コルベさんに
And everyone's a
報
gangster
告しなきゃ。
in the search for knowledge and truth until it hits one of their pet beliefs. And then they're exactly the same.
それでも言わなきゃ。神様
Maybe
が
don't.
こんなことお許しにならない。コルベさん。
He actually is away.
今研究会の時間か。
He'll be gone a while.
今日は本題に入る前に話すことがある。
I'm getting a little bit tired of that Yolenta girl.
今我々人類はプトレマイオスの宇宙を受け入れている。実際それでも日常的には大した問題はない。
Thank God for that idea in the show about how even a wrong answer can be beautiful and useful.
我々だけは真理の探求を諦めてはならん。あれは真理とは思えない。
I mean, I guess if you're going to take a risk, now would be the time.
異教徒の神話にイカロスという者がいる。ロウの翼で太陽を目指し墜落したものだ。彼の誤りは太陽に挑んだ傲慢さではない。ロウが解けるという父の警告を軽んじた無知にある。
This is so great. Again, his son, perfect. I mean, just perfect choice for an analogy.
その無謀さだ。真の宇宙を完成させるためイカロスにならねば。
That justifies the title in such an expansive, rounded way. It's funny because my friend was saying that his take on the show was that fundamentally it's about pursuing something you really love with passion. And so the question came to mind, what would be my version of their stars? And immediately the idea popped into my head that for me, it's media, right? Like it's watching stories and characters and narratives play out and trying to like find utility in it. Icarus is such a great myth. It's so naturally captivating, like Original Sin and like media. The devil is in the analysis. And yeah, maybe the best reading isn't don't strive for things, but more like don't be arrogant. I mean, the show show through and through is a perfect example of that. Because like, yeah, you should go for the sun, but you should also be aware of the dangers. This is not something to do frivolously. On a socio-political level, this maybe also is one of the fundamental struggles and why across cultures things seem to be framed, at least somewhat, along that axis of transformation versus like sticking to values. Because we are trying to reach for the sun, you know, we are trying to improve. It seems like that's something like an internal fundamental mandate of humanity. But you're talking about movements in society, and the atoms, the building blocks of those societies are real people in their lives. So it probably makes a lot of sense to tread carefully, to move slowly and deliberately, and like think very carefully about the dangers, which often are things that we're not even considering in the risk analysis. Things that primary and secondary and tertiary, etc., 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 etc. effect so many levels deep that aren't always even obvious within the time span of the affected change. It can take decades or centuries to play out. This also may be connected to why you can simultaneously have incredible nostalgia for the past and also never want to return to it. The past didn't have some of the problems that are unique to the current time, because those are the things that are in flux and are changing, and therefore we notice more clearly. But there's also tremendous benefit to a lot of those very changes, so it's hard to imagine life without them.
そこで何をしている？
ピアスト様、いや、この姿はですね。
I don't care, man. Just
君は
whatever.
確か研究職志望だったろ？
He also has his suspicions.
研究会になぜ参加しない？成果がないというなら解雇するぞ。
I'm not allowed. Does he not know that?
その
Tell him. Tell him.
差別されてるな。
Oh, this is great.
いや、あるいは妥当な判断か。
What?
悪魔が取り付くのは女性が多いという論文を読んだことがある。
That explains a lot.
だとしたら女性は元来議論や研究発表は向いてないとも言える。
Don't get discouraged. She's just putting this out there as an idea. It almost feels like a test.
聖書は真理だ。
Oh. Disappointing.
もちろんそれはその通り。
Or is this also a test? You're confusing me, PS.
正しい読み方ができているかはわからない。今後見せたい論文があったら持ってこい。
Oh, okay. Man, he really made that a tricky landscape. He presented that in the most difficult possible way to like heighten her nerves to the max.
本当に来ますかね？
来るさ。
Without a doubt. I know because I have the same disease.
主人はいません。
Bold. I mean, we knew that already. But I respect the audacity. Audacity is what we need right now.
我々に協力していただけますか？
はい。
Absolutely. No question. At great personal risk.
あなたが働いてるのってあのピャスト博の施設ですか？
はい。
オクジー君。
See ya.
ヨレンタさん、この件はすべて。
That's disappointing. We came all this way with audacity. You just threw away your audacity.
味方につけたらこれ以上なく強い。
And I know you like documents, especially secret.
働いてるなら分かってるでしょ。彼が我々に協力するわけない。
一体どういうことです？ピャスト博って？
Count PS is going through some reflections recently. He's honing in on what really
天動
matters to
説
him.
を超える完璧な天動説の証明に人生を捧げてる貴族だ。
Okay, so when he was talking about audacity, he meant audacity improving the common, safe conception of truth. Not very audacious of you, Count Piest. But I also do see this, where the scales haven't fully updated. So, like, ideas aren't controversial anymore. They're very common and mainstream, but, like, they're put forth as being very brave. Though the other side of that is that, like, audacity isn't a measure of truth. You can be audaciously wrong. It really is Hegel's dialectical thing of, like, we're swinging back and forth, but also forward simultaneously. Status quo and consensus is not good in itself. Contrarianism and radicalism is not a good in itself. It's the interplay and back and forth. To throw something else in here that's barely related, I have this growing sensation that, speaking of games and orientations, one of the games that's becoming increasingly common right now, even though I don't think it's being voiced so directly, and I'm not convicted in this is just like a growing hunch, is something like main character syndrome, where things and events and discussion are on the surface about the thing or the ideas or the events, but actually are about me. It's my journey. I am the hero in the struggle. This has to reflect on me somehow. And maybe this is just a tiny element of things, but it's like a colored paint drop falling into water that's just enough to change the overall color. So one of the ways to go about that is to increasingly form the narrative around there being antagonistic forces to you. And because this is sort of a narrative thing, right? Like there's a hero narrative, the tools of discourse and the discourse itself ends up revolving around the narrative more so than the thing or like an inherent overall pursuit that's consistent. One tangible way I noticed this is like for some commentators, no matter what happens, there's an outrage to be found somewhere. Even if like this outrage is inconsistent with the previous outrage, there just has to be outrage because I need to align myself in opposition to the antagonistic force so that sort of by definition I'm the protagonist.
キャスト博に頼むなど無謀すぎる。
No, we're using audacious.
大地を動かす無謀さに比べたら些細なことでは。
Ooh, good answer.
安戸博は誰よりも天動説を重んじてる。でも
He's conflicted. He has conflicting values.
真理を重んじてる。
Yeah, which will win?
では案内します。
Well, that settles that. Poor Oxy. Dragged along on this whole ride. He just wanted to live an innocent life, assassinating duelists.
大方の罪をなすりつけられるだろう。
Okay, so yeah, we're
む
just
しろ好都合の
straight up
提案
willing to use
か
her.
もしれん。
I can hear you. I may be a woman, but I have ears. As we all know, women have inferior hearing for some reason. Their gentle fairness, they have gentle fairness of hearing.
宇宙論について話があるというのは。
ええ。
Maybe we could ease into it. Yeah, ease into it. Butter him up. You just gotta butter him up. Don't butter him up. Buttering him up does not
これ
work.
だけを手短に話せ。
He's not feeling particularly buttery right now.
かつてピャスト博もその目で名を馳せた。
Oh,
も
for
し以
something
前
of
よりも
value?
観測が不便であれば、いつでもオクジーをお使いください。
Oxy is a sacrificial pawn. He's a bartering chip. Okay.
私が誰だか分かっているのか。
Yes.
その話は教会が認める宇宙と
Oh,
異
he
な
slipped
っ
it right out just based on that
そ
name.
れに私の人生をかけた研究が
Interesting,
間
yeah.
違いだと
Deep
主張するものだ
personal
ぞ。
stake in this. But that goes away when you just accept the beautiful, beautiful message of one of the early episodes of the show about being wrong. It's a major contribution if you're wrong. It doesn't feel that way, but that's a conflicting thing because that's wanting to feel good and get attention or whatever. The truth is the truth. It's a different value scale. And being wrong in a very observable way is a contribution to the truth. Being wrong is not something to be afraid of. Being evil is something to be afraid of. I so deeply believe that if we can separate those two into their respective categories, where one is goodness and decency and one is just like the free-flowing domain of idea expression and exchange, you can't actually be wrong in the way that matters. This so often goes so horribly wrong because those two things are so often so horribly confused. Put your worst ideas out there conscientiously and ethically, without emotional manipulation, without coercion, without threat. Spread that as an ethos, be an avatar for that element of it, focus on getting that to a critical adoption point, and then humanity will be able to sort out the ideas for themselves as just a natural, inevitable consequence. One of the ideas this show is helping me form already is that the truth will win. And so playing games with it, doing evil things, being unethical, I think even if it's in pursuit of something that happens to be true, undermines the overall movement in pursuit of truth. Because even if you have the truth, you're corrupting the process of truth searching. And the better the process of truth searching is, the faster we'll get to the truth. You could maybe say the same thing for mistakes. Personal mistakes, if it's done in the right spirit, and you have the right processes so that they're able to create positive feedback for you, are almost always going to be beneficial.
ですが真理かもしれません。それを求めて人生を捧げたのでしょう。
It's time to make a choice. Also, there's great redemption in that. Just like with Yolenta, you give it a little bit of time here. Please just don't kill us in the meantime while you think it over. My whole life has been a lie.
キャスト家に生まれながら下等な天文など学ぶ気か。
父上。
もう帰ってこなくていいぞ。
Bye, Felicia.
夜空を眺めて歴史を変えられるとでも。
How could you change history? Okay, I don't understand your question. Deep personal stakes in this. Daddy's hatred, trying to make a mark, prove I was right, change history somehow.
君もピャスト一族の一人だろう。
Formerly.
学術発展にあたって何が重要だと思う？
無謀さです。
Audacity, it's the theme of the episode.
この巨大な施設で一体何の研究を？
宇宙の完成だよ。
That's a good way to phrase it.
現状の宇宙は誤差
Okay,
がある。
interesting.
神が作った世界にだぞ。大衆が納得しようが私には許せんことだ。
God wouldn't make mistakes. Just for fun, let's assume we all believe in God. Which is more likely? God made a mistake, or we made a mistake in understanding God's work? I just had the instinct to say that Rafal was born in the wrong time if he was just born a few years later. But I mean, maybe this is partly because of Rafal. Who knows?
ここにある膨大な記録は私だけが閲覧できる。じき私は真理にたどり着く。
If only reaching the truth meant having books, that would be a lot smarter.
私にどう貢献する？
はい。
Audacity.
私は
Oh.
これはよし。
This is going straight to the library.
優れた道具は優れた能力の人間に使われるべきだ。早速明日から観測を始めろ。
And he didn't solve it,
神が君に与えた才能を
but he put his
出し惜
faith
しむ
in
な。
Piest. Piest also might not solve it, but he can put his heart, his faith in them. The torch
君
will
が
be
夜
passed.
空を眺めれば歴史が変わると。君こ
Thank
そ
you for
は
phrasing it that way.
一族の誇りであると。
But this also is what makes it deeply personal, so there's some conflict there.
宇宙を完成させねば。
PS will come around. One thing I like about the PS struggle, it's so cool how they can develop these little vignettes for side characters so quickly and so convincingly. But like, victories give way to complacency, which gives way to mistakes. And then sometimes you find yourself being the perpetrator of the very thing you made your name or you developed your personality around conquering. The way this often comes up for me as an idea is not the search for truth so much, but personal relationships where someone wrongs you and you are justified in your pain about that. But like, you sometimes end up at a point where you're harboring a lot of negativity that's affecting your actions through your expectations in a negative way, long after the person who's wronged you has realized the error of their ways and has repented and has totally changed. And so if you were to then, for example, take revenge or to mistreat that person, the carrier of the wrongdoing now is you. As frustrating as it is to think about sometimes. There's a parallel of two monks who come across a woman who can't cross a stream or something, and even though they're not allowed to have contact with women, one of them picks her up and carries her over the river. 2 miles down the road, the other monk says to him, you know, you're really not supposed to touch women according to our rules. And the monk says, I put that woman down 2 miles ago and you're still carrying her. The same back and forth applies in a lot of ways. I mean, PS initially an audacious fighter for truth became very settled on one idea of what that truth was, and then became the vanguard of the orthodoxy, the safe, completely non-audacious, widely held beliefs. And I do see that, you know, like champions of justice who are fighting for a really good cause fail to update to new information long after their initial struggle has been addressed. I mean, even if they were instrumental in helping change in that struggle, because life is so complex and multifaceted, working towards solutions means impacting a lot of different things simultaneously. But if they're only focused and stuck on that one axis, and also maybe have that sort of hero narrative thing going where they actually have an incentive not to accept change because then they lose that hero status thing. They go from being truly brave, courageous, well-meaning fighters of good causes and end up being like defenders of very strange things. It's never over. You've never made it. It's not a point. It's not an identity. Just as science and truth-seeking in general is a process and not an end result, so too are the personal processes by which we navigate the world.